The thing that I really hope for is that AI allows us to and frees us up to be more human, to spend our time on the human things that are unique to us, like relationships and love, insight and strategy. I think the most successful professionals in the age of AI are going to be the ones that really lean into that. I don't think AI is going to replace founders anytime soon, but founders who use AI are absolutely going to replace founders who don't.
Jeff Bussgang is general partner at Flybridge Capital Partners, an AI-focused fund, and he teaches entrepreneurship at the Harvard Business School. He's also the author of the new book, The Experimentation Machine, which is a playbook for how founders can harness AI in their startups. Last week, we spoke with legendary investor Vinod Khosla about how AI is disrupting every level of our lives. Now, in part 2 of our investor series, we're getting granular and talking with Jeff about how founders can use AI to help elevate their businesses. We'll talk about what it means to be an AI native company, how AI can make you a 10x founder, and how to scale without growing. Before we get into my conversation with Jeff, I want to talk about some headline news from the past week. The U.S. made a series of AI-related deals with countries in the Gulf that should have some pretty big implications globally. And here to help us break it down is Jeremy Kahn. He's the AI editor at Fortune. Hi, Jeremy. It's great to have you back on Pioneers of AI 2 weeks in a row.
Hey, Rana. It's great to be back here again.
So we wanted to have you back on the show to break down some recent news coming out of the Gulf. And I'm particularly interested in what's happening there because I'm Egyptian. I grew up in Kuwait and Abu Dhabi. And I've just been so fascinated by how the region is investing heavily in AI. They've been doing this for a while, but it does feel like last week really solidified that. So let's first set the scene. President Trump took a 3-day trip to the Middle East where he visited Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE. And he was also joined by some of the biggest tech leaders like Elon Musk, Sam Altman, and Jensen Huang. Why make this trip?
Well, I think for the U.S., this is an area where there is a lot of money and a lot of interest in investing, particularly in new technology. You have a lot of countries in the region that want to diversify their economies. It's particularly true of Saudi Arabia that wants to diversify away from oil. So I think the U.S. and a lot of U.S. companies are looking at the Gulf as a good region to potentially gather funds.
You know what really strikes me, and I'm curious what your take on this is. So NVIDIA and OpenAI are already global companies. And, they could have struck these business deals with Saudi and the UAE anyway. Why did it take the US president to broker these conversations?
Yeah, it's a good question. There is a strategic element and a kind of geopolitical element to what's going on here. The U.S. is sees itself as in this kind of AI race with China in particular. And the Gulf, just by virtue of where it's located and a lot of its history, has kind of been in between these two, sort of the West and the East, as it were, and has kind of played that position to its advantage. So I think, for the U.S., there's been this issue that they were concerned that some of the technology companies in the Gulf region were kind of close to China, were potentially going to use Chinese technology. The U.S. didn't want to see this happen. So some of what was going on here, and one of the reasons that you had such governmental involvement was the kind of geostrategic implications of this. There had already been this effort to get G42, which is this big UAE AI and tech company, not to use any Chinese infrastructure, not to use any Chinese chips, and to use American chips. But then, of course, there was this problem in that the U.S. had also restricted the export of the most advanced NVIDIA chips to most countries in the world, actually, because they were worried about the potential that this technology would kind of leak from these other countries to China. And those export restrictions had initially affected the Gulf states. The Gulf states wanted to see those export restrictions lifted. They wanted to be able to obtain the most advanced NVIDIA hardware. And so sort of for all those reasons, I think there was this, you had to have the government involved to make sure that not only that NVIDIA could strike this deal, but that those chips were going to be allowed to be exported to UAE and Saudi, and also to make sure that this was part of a wider kind of alliance where the U.S. is kind of trying to cement its influence and make sure that China does not have influence in that region.
Okay, so there were a lot of deals that were made last week, some energy-related, some manufacturing-related, and a lot of them AI-related, particularly in the UAE and Saudi. Can you walk us through some of these kind of commitments and their importance?
Sure. So Trump, when his traveling entourage of CEOs first went to Saudi Arabia, where they signed a deal with a brand new company that the Saudi government has set up called Humane, and they agreed that Humane was going to build out a data center, initially 500 megawatts, which is about the size of a lot of data centers that are now going up in the U.S. A 500 megawatt data center that would have access to initially 18,000 NVIDIA top-of-the-line GPUs. So that was sort of the first deal that was struck there. And then they went to UAE. And in UAE, they struck this kind of mega deal. The UAE is interested in creating this very large data center campus. And that deal is to supply ultimately 5 gigawatts of energy to this data center campus. It will eventually have, and the deal that was struck was for 500,000 NVIDIA GPUs. But this is one of these interesting aspects of this, again, for geostrategic reasons. A part of this agreement is that data center infrastructure is going to be kind of managed and operated on behalf of the UAE government by U.S. tech companies. So it's kind of an interesting arrangement.
Yeah. What's interesting, too, is it's reciprocal, right? Saudi Arabia's company DataVault will invest $20 billion in AI data centers and infrastructures in the U.S., which is also very interesting.
Yeah, the U.S. tech companies are looking to build so much infrastructure in the U.S. that they really do need to find these external sources of funding. But of course, people have raised some interesting questions about that too, because if you have the Gulf nations, funding the development of these data centers and potentially owning the real estate on which these things are being built, there are some issues about control and what happens if the interests of the U.S. ultimately diverge from those of these Gulf nations. Is that going to cause a problem down the line?
Was AI security and AI safety part of the conversation at all?
So security, yes. Security was definitely part of the conversation. And if you look at the rationale for why it's going to be these U.S. companies managing this facility in the UAE, there was a lot of discussion about that was in order to make sure that these facilities were secure, that it was going to be difficult for people to hack into them and potentially steal the know-how, both either of the chips themselves, so the physical security of the facility, but also the technical know-how of how to build these large frontier AI models. Security, yeah, it was definitely part of the conversation, but safety less so. I think as a whole, safety is kind of taking a back seat here. Everyone's talking about trying to push innovation and progress as far forward as quickly as possible. And so I don't think there was as much discussion about AI safety.
One of the things that I find really fascinating, having grown up in the Middle East, is there's a mini race between these countries too. It's not like one monolithic, kind of Middle East. Actually, Saudi is in a competition with the UAE to establish itself as the AI hub. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if you look up at the standing up of this company, Humane, in Saudi Arabia, which is funded by the Sovereign Wealth Fund from the country, the Public Investment Fund, it clearly is being positioned as a kind of rival to G42, which is the big company that the UAE has already established. And if you even look at what they're saying, one of the first things Humane is going to do is train a large language model that's very good at Arabic language. Well, it turns out that G42 already has an AI model that's very good at Arabic language. So yes, this is clearly like Saudi Arabia, not wanting to be left behind by its regional rival, the UAE, and trying to say, hey, we can be big players in AI too. We want to have a contender in this race to be at least the kind of dominant regional player when it comes to AI.
Well, we will definitely be watching this space. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Rana. It's great to be here again.
Hi, Jeff. Welcome to Pioneers of AI, and it's so good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So you recently published the book, The Experimentation Machine, which I loved reading and we're going to talk about. But what inspired you to write the book?
So I have two hats, as you know. One is I teach at Harvard Business School in the entrepreneurship unit, and I focus on launching tech ventures. So I get all the founder aspiring students. And then secondly, I'm an early stage venture capitalist, my firm Flybridge. All we do is focus on AI investing. And so I was seeing in those two worlds a whole new trend around using and leveraging AI to become 10x founders. And so the book tries to bring that to life.
Yeah, we're going to talk about all of that in a second. But before we get into that, I wanted to hear more about your origin story. You spend a lot of time at actually a number of startups. So you're kind of an operator turned investor of sorts. So share some of the highlights of your journey and how did you end up with this investor hat?
Yeah, so I was an undergraduate in computer science at Harvard. I graduated in 1991. My focus was on AI and natural language processing, which in the late 80s is hard to imagine. And then I went into a business career after also getting my MBA at Harvard as a tech founder. And in the mid-90s was involved in a company that went public, Internet 1.0 company called Open Market. I was an executive team member and had an amazing ride. And then in the early 2000s, I co-founded a company called UPromise, also venture-backed, also tech, also an amazing ride. It sold successfully in the mid-2000s. Both companies were venture-backed by Greylock. And when Greylock shifted west in the early 2000s, two of the young Greylock Boston partners spun out, and with me, we formed Flybridge. So I had this entrepreneurship background with their investing background in combination.
How did your kind of entrepreneurship background influence your lens on investing?
I think what I would say is that I have a huge amount of founder empathy. And yes, I have the operating experience of taking a company public and building multiple large companies that were successful, but more at the core is founder empathy and that emotional roller coaster and that sense of loneliness that founders undertake when they go on this journey. And just being, as much as I can, a advisor, consigliere, friend, companion, mentor, coach, whatever it takes to help them get through to the next level.
I think that's so important because I'm kind of drawing from my entrepreneurship experience too. It is an emotional roller coaster. Some days you feel like you're on top of the world, you got this, and then the next day, I don't know, you got to know from an investor or a customer, or you lose some of your talent and you're like, it's existential, right? And so being able to have investors where you can talk about this openly and feel safe to bring this up is really special.
I think one of my founder friends captured it beautifully when he said, I eat no's for breakfast. And just that sense of always having to push through negativity and always focusing on that sense of belief and optimism that the next door, whether it's an investor or customer or M&A candidate. Obviously, the macro environment has a lot of turmoil and you can't control that as a founder. That can be very frustrating. So really just being an empathetic advisor, investor, and friend, as I said, is really what I center on.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about Flybridge's investment thesis. And also, you've been investing in AI for at least a decade, right? So talk about what's your view on the AI landscape as it relates to investing?
Yeah, as you said, Flybridge has been investing in AI for 15 plus years. And our original thesis was more around data and machine learning, and that led to companies like Zest AI and MongoDB, which was an important data infrastructure company. And then later, we've been more focused on the application layer, and that's really where we're centered today. We believe that the foundation layers are getting commoditized in a very good way. Prices are coming down for AI, compute, and inference dramatically, and that enables this massive opportunity at the application layer. I refer to it as the AI dividend, much as we all benefited from the cloud dividend over the last few decades. We're entering into a moment where application software providers are benefiting from these incredible AI dividends that are coming our way.
Do you only invest in AI companies?
Exclusively.
Wow. Yeah.
So at Flybridge, our thesis has always been around enterprise software. And AI was an important component of that over the last few decades, but in recent years, it's all we do. So we're exclusively an AI-focused investor. I'll say there's one exception, though, and that is we are big believers in AI-native founders, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Talk about. Yep.
And if we see an AI-native founder operating in a slightly non-AI native space, we take that exceptional opportunity to invest in them as well.
Yeah. In the book, you talk about AI native companies. Can you define what that means?
An AI native company is a company that infuses AI into everything they do, every function and every process. When somebody comes to the CEO and says they want to hire someone, the first thing the CEO says at an AI native company is, could AI replace that hire? When someone describes a new process or a new workflow that they're creating, the first thing that is asked in the meeting is, how could we use AI to do that more efficiently? So an AI native company is leveraging AI across engineering, sales, marketing, customer service, executive functions, finance, everything, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah. I'm starting to see companies that are basically, their product is essentially an AI employee. Like one company, Tough Day, they're building AI managers. There are AI healthcare administrators. Do you envision a world where an org chart will be a combination of humans and AI?
Absolutely. In fact, when I talk about the contents of the book and the moment we're in, I show the standard traditional org chart of a seed stage company. You or I might invest $2 or $3 million. The team would hire 10, 12, 15 employees. They'd go build the product and they'd race to get to the 1 million of ARR magic threshold. Today, it's 2 or 3 employees and hundreds, if not thousands, of AI agents working in tandem to get to the magic $1 million ARR threshold. So yeah, I think you're going to see this dramatic change in org charts. Sam Altman has this famous sort of throwaway line he uses where he says his founder friends joke about when will we see the solo entrepreneur that has achieved the milestone of building a unicorn, $1 billion company, as a single employee. And I looked in a recent analysis I did of unicorns. We now have a dozen unicorns with less than 100 employees.
Yeah.
And the question is, in 2026, will they be able to do that with less than 10 employees?
Right.
And in 2027 or 2028, 5, 3, 2 employees? That's really the moment we're in with the age of AI for AI native companies.
Yeah, it's so exciting. All right, so AI is moving so fast, and one of the questions I have with my investor hat on is defensibility. I often tell founders, if you wake up every day concerned about the next version of ChatGPT and it's going to put your company or your product out of business, then I don't want to be an investor. That's not defensible. However, if the next version of these foundation models strengthens your product and your service, then there's something there. How do you think about defensibility, especially with the pace of change and acceleration of developments?
It's a great question, and it's the question in every one of our investment committee meetings.
Yeah.
And the 3 things that we focus on outside of team, which I can come back to, but just in the core fundamental business and product are, 1, are there sources of proprietary data?
Totally. Data moats.
Obviously, yeah, the data moats. Obviously, the major models have enormous data sets, but not all of them can access proprietary data sets. So, for example, we have a AI for legal software company called Noetica. They ingest thousands and thousands of contracts on private corporate debt transactions. And those debt transactions have proprietary terms in them. And so they now have all this insight into who Citibank lends to and what the terms are, and who JPM lends to and what their terms are, and all the way down the line. So that when a new lender steps to the table, they can do this incredibly rich terms analysis. That's a unique data set that only Noetica has. So the data mode is really important. Second is around workflows and that sort of last mile. The platforms that the foundation models are providing are incredible, but they're not trying to nail the interface for the last mile for the user. So, for example, we have a portfolio company called Allspice, which is for hardware engineers. And it's that last mile of doing hardware design and collaboration, the GitHub for hardware, that allows us to have confidence that the engineers are in that platform at Allspice all day, every day. That's what they live in. And they're beginning to really get addicted to that workflow. And then the third area, and this touches on sort of linked to the second, is around that human AI interface. It's that insight into how humans will interact with your AI platform. If you look at the history of ChatGPT was an experiment that was thrown on top of the SDK, the API that OpenAI was launching, and it turned out to be an incredible interface, and the rest is history. So founders that really can understand that interface and the human AI interface to manifest these AI capabilities, but do it simply and in a way that's usable.
Yeah, a few thoughts on that. I was speaking at a ServiceNow event recently, and one of the questions that came up is, and I think there are studies, there are now people looking at this, if you build personality into these bots or interfaces, they're more likely to adapt and kind of, especially when it's part of a team, if these bots have a personality, they kind of, they fit in better into the team culture. And I think we're going to start to see more of that.
I think you're totally right. I know this is an area you have a lot of expertise in, but that emotional connection that we're going to have with the AI agents that work alongside us in the organizations, I think that's going to be really powerful. And so the flip side is the software companies that can bring that emotional intelligence into the AI agents and help them work with the humans in collaboration are going to be the successful software companies. I
also have a thesis around the evolution of the human-machine interface anyhow. Like if you think of a smartphone, it's not really AI native today. And so I think a combination of conversational, perceptual interfaces, we'll see a lot of innovation there. I haven't seen the thing that I think is like the iPhone equivalent, but I'm curious, what do you invest in these companies? Are you keeping an eye on that?
We're very much keeping an eye on that. Obviously, pendants and other interfaces and hardware devices and these consumer hardware interfaces, I think, are really rich areas for innovation.
Yeah. So let's next talk about the book and how we bring AI to the startup landscape. And first off, you talk about the 10X founder. What is that, and how do you look for these 10X founders?
So everyone knows about the mythical 10X developer. That's the developer that's so effective, they're not just 10% or 20% better than the average developer, they're 10 times better. And for a while, founders were sort of limited in their ability to use tools to be more productive because the tools were software productivity tools that everybody had at their disposal. But now these AI tools allow us to see founders operating like 10X founders, being 10 times more productive, and organizations becoming 10X organizations, leaders becoming 10X leaders, 10X salespeople, 10X marketers. And it means that founders can now lead organizations far more efficiently with far fewer humans.
Yeah, I think that is so fascinating for a whole bunch of reasons. I think it makes this early check so much more important, right? As an early stage investor, if you're going to assume that these companies are going to be very capital efficient, then that early check might have the most leverage. Is that the way you think about it?
I think the venture industry is really about to change dramatically for that very reason. So if you look at what's happening in the marketplace, companies are building without needing capital. They can seed strap their way to $1 million, $2 million of revenue, and then scale with modest capital infusion to over $1 million of revenue per employee. We have a number of our portfolio companies doing over $1 million of revenue per employee at early stages. And that's because the founders and the teams are just so incredibly efficient and leveraging these AI tools.
Okay. So I'll ask you one more question, and then I want to bring all of that to life with examples. So let's talk about product market fit, right? How do you define product market fit, and how does AI help accelerate getting to that product market fit?
So one of the themes in the book is that we're in a moment where we're combining these timely AI tools with timeless methods for business building. And it's important not to lose track of the timeless methods, not to get too caught up in the technology and the latest tool. And so the way I describe product market fit and the framework I use, which is the Hunch framework that I describe in the book, I try to really focus on those timeless methods. And it's 5 letters. So it begins with H, which is the hair on fire value proposition. It's not nice to have. It's beyond must have. It's your hair is on fire. You need to solve this problem. It has to be a top 1 or 2 priority. U is for usage. You want to see a high degree of usage. As many people know, usage is the most important indicator of product market fit. N is for NPS score.
NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. It's a metric used to measure customer loyalty, basically asking customers on a scale from 1 to 10 how likely they are to recommend a product.
C is churn. You want the churn to be low. And then the final H is a high LTV to CAC ratio, lifetime value to customer acquisition cost. Good unit economics. You can't forget the timeless importance of profitable, sustainable business building. With those 5 letters, the 5 hunch letters, then you say, okay, we are going to have different stages. In the early days, it's going to be nascent, and we're going to see naturally solid performance in some, okay performance in others. And over time, you want to build up to more positive product market fit and eventually radical product market fit.
I mean, one of the themes that I really liked in the book too is that it's all about experimentation. And the faster you can iterate through these hypotheses testing, the quicker, presumably, you'll get to product market fit.
And that's the second part of your question, which is how does AI impact the product market fit journey, is you can run experiments so much faster and so much more effectively today. I mean, building prototypes happens in an hour. And when founders would come to me 5-10 years ago and say, hey, I have this idea and I've got these wireframes, my first comment to them was, you need a technical co-founder if you yourself aren't a builder.
Totally.
Now I say it's like the revenge of the MBA. MBAs can build. They can use these tools like Lovable and Replit and Cursor and Vercel, and they can build applications. It's really extraordinary.
I spun out of MIT, so I'm part of this like venture mentoring network at MIT, and a lot of the we're on this mailing list, and a lot of the calls are, I'm looking for a technical co-founder to help me with this business idea. Do you think we don't need that anymore?
I wouldn't say we don't need it, but I would say business founders or non-technical founders can make so much more progress.
Yeah.
They can get maybe not all the way from 0 to 1, but 0 to 0.5.
Yeah.
And certainly the first thing we say to people is not, do you have somebody with you who's got a PhD in machine learning, which is what we used to say.
Right.
But now it's, do you have capacity to build? And maybe it's you that's going to be the builder as the founder, or maybe you've got a team of builders around you. But the capacity to build is so much better now than it ever was.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of fascinating. My son is 16 and he's very AI forward, and he's been able to use Replit to build an app and a website, and he uses Manus AI to do a lot of research. And I'm like, wow, I spent like 8 years of my career like learning how to code and then learning all the machine learning basics. And now, the barrier has been lowered and anybody can code, and it's really fascinating.
It is fascinating. You're touching on something though that when I did sort of a mini book tour, I was out with OpenAI. They invited me to come to a book talk at their offices, and I got into a great conversation with their leadership about this question of when will the first principles thinking be learned? Because your 16-year-old may be so facile with the tools, and I'm not saying this is going to be the case with him, but he may not do the hard first principles thinking that you had to do and that I had to do by learning assembly language as my first programming language and then graduating to C and then C++. So this understanding of the depth of the intricate sort of components and building blocks, I think, is going to be really interesting. Where does the wisdom and the insight come from if the tools are doing these things for you?
Yeah. So we talked about the use case around kind of accelerating building the product using these AI co-pilots. What about using AI for sales and marketing?
Yeah. So I talk in the book about Topline Pro, which is one of our portfolio companies that's a platform that provides an ability for service pros, think landscapers, plumbers, electricians, to build websites and interact with their customers like a CRM, a customer relationship management platform. They are using AI to not only leverage all these public data sources to identify service pros, but then also to do lookalike matching, just like Facebook lookalike does, to match the pros that are going to be the best fit for them. And then they're using AI to build the websites automatically, ingesting the Facebook pages and Instagram pages of the pros. And then they've created an AI customer service bot to handle service queries. But one area where they were struggling with was around outbound outreach. They were emailing pros, and pros aren't great over email. They're on a roof, they're in a job in a house, they're underneath a sink fixing something that's clogged. And so they're not on their desk doing emails. But they decided to personalize emails using AI, and they created personalized video demos of their website in action. Here's this video I've created for you. Here's this website. It's got your content. This is what it would look like if you had me build it. Do you want me to build it?
Yeah.
And it took their response rates from, less than 1% to double digits.
Wow.
It was an incredible impact. And they used these modern video generation tools like HeyGen and 11 Labs, and they bolted them onto all these other workflows and AI sales enablement tools to create this incredibly fully automated sales and marketing pipeline.
It's amazing. For our listeners who are not familiar with HeyGen and 11 Labs, I did an episode where I shared my own virtual twin, basically, we used HeyGen and 11 Labs and a bunch of other tools. And, I had it speak Spanish, which I don't speak. I had it speak Mandarin, which I also don't speak. And unless you know me really well, it looks fine. It's fine enough. And it's the worst the technology will ever be. It's going to keep getting better.
So one of the complaints I used to get as a faculty member at HBS is that my students would say, I don't have enough office hour capacity.
Right.
I'm a full-time venture capitalist. I teach part-time at the school. There's an insatiable desire for office hours amongst our students, and I just don't have infinite hours in the day. So I created an AI clone using Delphi.
Yep.
And that clone is trained on all 3 of my books, 80 HBS case studies, and about 20 years of blogging. And it's text, voice, or video. And it's been launched in the public now.
Yeah.
I trained it on it with my students, and they loved it. And my students rave about it. They say that it has given them infinite access to my wisdom, to the extent I have any, on startups and startup building. It's not that I've changed my office hour volume. I'm still at the same number of hours in the day that I can, direct to my students, but they have this now all day, 7x24 access to me. So I would come into the classroom sometimes in the morning and my students would say, I had a great conversation about my startup with you last night, like 2 a.m.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating?
It's incredible.
So in your book, you also talk about scaling without growing. Define what you mean by that. And talk about the different ways, I guess, some of these AI native companies are thinking about hiring.
I want to give credit to Scott Belsky of Adobe, who came up with the phrase, or at least as the first person I saw use the phrase, scaling without growing, that we're sort of entering into the era where startups can scale quite dramatically without adding headcount. And I mentioned some of the efficiencies that we're seeing. Those efficiencies began with the Magnificent Seven. If you look at the profile of what the big 7 companies who are the most advanced and sophisticated in using the AI tools that they've built for themselves, they've been growing 20, 30% a year over year, without scaling headcount. We may be at a point where we've reached peak employment generally in the economy, because now so many of our companies and companies all around the world in every sector are able to scale dramatically without growing. What that means is that founders can spend more time on the stuff they love. As you know, when you're scaling a company, you spend a ton of time on hiring and HR issues and interpersonal issues and politics and operations and org building and compensation and reviews. And wouldn't it be great if you could do the exact same throughput and output with half the people, with a third of the people, with a 10th of the number of people? Now, there's a whole bunch of implications for the economy and the labor force that we can talk about, but from a founder's lens, that's a dream, because you can spend more time on building and on working with customers.
How do we ensure inclusion, right? Especially women. Like, we need more women in the AI space, and also underrepresented minorities and people of color.
We desperately need more representation in the AI space, not only because it's the right thing to do, but it's actually good for the companies that are building these products. They are going to eliminate biases if they have a diverse set of viewpoints. And everybody knows these models have inherent biases based on the training. And the more diverse the viewpoints, the better the models are going to be. I mentioned in the book this example of Snapchat and the camera not being as easily able to recognize faces of color. And an engineer who was Black, who's a friend and colleague of mine and was a product manager at Snapchat, pointed that out. And suddenly he became the head of making sure that fixing the problem and making sure the cameras in Snapchat's application would be able to identify faces of color. So I think it's critical that we create pathways for underrepresented individuals to get into the tech sector and to help them become AI native contributors into the ecosystem.
Now, you also talk about the pipeline myth. What do you mean by that?
When we co-founded, and when I say we, I should say when my partners, Chip Hazard and Anna Palmer, co-founded X Factor Ventures, which is a venture fund focused exclusively on backing female founders, we discovered that there were way more female founders than we appreciated or realized as a partnership that was mainly male. And similarly, when I started Hack Diversity, I realized there are way more Black and brown engineers and founders than I realized. And so these pools of talent exist, but networks are inherently biased.
Yep.
We have relationships with people who are like us or have been in environments that we've been in. It's just human nature to have homophily. And so expanding our networks requires intentionality. And that's why I say there's a pipeline myth for those of us who are hiring, finding more women who are qualified, finding more underrepresented individuals who are qualified. It just takes expanding your network into those pools of talent.
Right. It's an access issue, not whether they exist. Yeah, absolutely. As we are kind of seeing more and more AI native companies, that we think about the ethical development and deployment of AI. So how do you think about the ethics angle as these companies are harnessing AI across every aspect of their business?
I talk about it in the book, and I do this in ethics module in my class at HBS as well. Sometimes you have to slow down a little bit and think about these unintended consequences. I had a number of alumni in my class go work for Juul, the vaping company. And they had good intentions when they went and joined that company.
Yeah.
But when that company began to sell to minors, and when we saw vaping in middle school and high school with cotton candy flavors and other types of flavors, they suddenly realized that the growth of the company obscured some unfortunate, unintended consequences and bad behaviors. And I think that future is the present today in the AI ecosystem, that we're going to see some unintended consequences, whether it's around safety or biases. Hopefully, we won't see those unintended consequences be dire, as the parable of the paperclip, where you set the AI to maximize the production of paper clips, and the AI realizes at one point in the cycle that the way to really maximize paperclip production is to eliminate all the humans on the planet, because humans are taking up resources that would be quite valuable in paperclip production. And so the AI that you assign to this very narrow task of maximizing paperclip production ends up eliminating the human race. That's the AI paperclip problem.
Right. Okay. So there is a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the economy, and it's just a very chaotic and volatile market. What's your advice to founders as they're starting companies these days?
It is a wildly volatile environment right now. And our advice to founders is keep your head down and just focus on what you can control. If you're a founder, let's say in an enterprise context, all you need is 10 or 20 great customers that are really happy with you in the early days. So go focus all your energy and go get those 10 or 20, and don't worry about the latest tweet from the president. Just focus on getting product market fit.
Yeah. Yeah. In a way, actually, it's a good time to be starting these companies, and it's a good time to be investing in these amazing transformative companies, but it is hard to kind of tune out.
I think the best founders are incredibly effective at eliminating distractions and just staying hyper-focused. I have a joke with one of my partners that sometimes my best founders are the least responsive to me.
Okay.
Because they're so focused on whatever it is that they're doing in the moment that they can't bother to respond to my email.
Right. Okay, last question. I love to ask this question to all my guests because I think about it a lot. In this age of AI, where AI can be smart and creative and a thought partner, what does it mean to be human in the age of AI? And I'll share a funny story because it was Mother's Day, and my 16-year-old got me this card, and his handwriting sucks. I'm like, oh my God, I failed as a mom. But anyway, so he literally stood next to me reading out the card, and But he had this like cute line. He was like, and you are a better creative and thought partner than ChatGPT. And I was like, yes, I win. So yeah, what do you think it means to be human in the age of AI?
I love that. I mean, the thing that I really hope for is that AI allows us to and frees us up to be more human, to spend our time on the human things that are unique to us, like relationships and love, insight and strategy, discernment, judgment, taste. I think those are the types of things where we're going to see humans really thrive. And I think the most successful professionals in the age of AI are going to be the ones that really lean into that.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Jeff, so much for coming on the show. This was great.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
AI is helping startups become successful faster. And while the fundamentals of a winning business still look the same, the pathways to get there are a whole lot more capital efficient. Jeff's point about how AI is enabling founders achieve 10x productivity, whether they're technical or not, is key. Founders can now utilize AI to solve problems across every aspect of their business, from coding to sales to marketing. All of this means that startups can get to product market fit quicker. Ultimately, this creates more opportunities for people to build their dream businesses with less resources. AI won't replace founders, but AI-native founders will replace founders who don't use AI. Thank you so much for joining us for our two-part investor series. Do you want us to do more series covering specific topics in the future? Let us know.